Hey, what's up guys? Bajiri here. Hope you guys have been enjoying patch 8.2, and I know I sure have, but it's time for us to get into some Arms Warrior PvP guide action. Also keep in mind, we'll be making a Fury guide, so keep an eye out for that. But this one's going to be all about Arms Warrior PvP. My plan is to go over our abilities, our talents that I recommend, PvP talents, and talk about stats a little bit. Probably can talk a teeny bit about rotation, but honestly, if you guys have seen the 8.0, 8.1 guides, not a whole lot has changed, but one of the big changes that we've seen in patch 8.2 are Azerite essences, which are really all a lot of fun. There's some really cool ones that I think are especially neat for PvP, so we can talk those over, and I'll give you guys an idea about how to kick some butt in PvP on your Arms Warrior in patch 8.2. Let's get to it. Alright, so first things first, we're going to go through some of our basic abilities, just because a lot of times I'll make these guides, sometimes from the perspective of you guys know what Arms Warrior is, and basically have an understanding of how to play, and you just want to look at your talents and your Azerite traits and your stats, but we're going to go just a teeny little bit more in depth in case there's any new warriors out there who need just a basic rundown, so we'll try to make this quick. Alright, just opening up our spellbook, we have Avatar, which is a talent that is basically a big offensive cooldown. It breaks you out of roots, and a lot of times that's going to be a nice little extra utility, but the main thing that the Avatar does is some big damage. There's also some interesting utility with certain Azerite traits we could talk about later. Battle Shout is just basic attack power buff. You always want to have this up. You know, anytime you zone into someplace, Battle Shout. Anytime you get a kill in a BG, nobody else around, let it loose a Battle Shout. Just make sure that you're buffed and that your teammates are buffed. Berserker Rage is an ability that gets you out of fear saps and incapacitated thingies, like monk incapacitate, things like that, gouge, and it makes you immune to those for 6 seconds. Basically, this is just one of your fear breakers. That's like the basic thing. It's just one of those things that warriors can do to get out of a certain type of CC. Bladestorm. Bladestorm is a big-time offensive cooldown. It puts up all your bleeds, does a fair amount of damage, especially in conjunction with other offensive cooldowns like Avatar and Warbreaker, like we just mentioned. It's also really nice to avoid CC. You cannot be CC'd while Bladestorming, and you can also get out of CCs like slows and roots by Bladestorming. This also is really cool with an essence that we'll talk about a little bit later. Charge is your basic mobility skill. It generates rage. Well, not as short of a cooldown as it used to be. 20-second cooldown, and it roots your opponents for 1 second. So it's basically just like it can initiate combat this way, close gaps this way. Just your basic mobility skill. Defensive Stance is a talent that I recommend that you guys always use in PvP. It allows you to swap into a stance where you deal less damage, but you take less damage as well. It makes you a little bit more tanky. You really have no self-healing as an Arms Warrior, but Defensive Stance is one of those things that you can do to mitigate damage on yourself and become a little bit more durable whenever you're taking damage. Die by the Sword is for those situations where Defensive Stance is not enough. They're taking a lot of damage, and you really want some high-quality mitigation on there. It's a long cooldown, but it's fairly powerful in that it parries all incoming attacks, physical attacks obviously, and not ranged attacks, unfortunately. But for those situations, you also have a 30% damage reduction on top of that. So you're going to be parrying all like melee trying to attack you, and you'll be slapping 30% damage mitigation on anything else. So it's a big, long cooldown, but it's a powerful one. So you're going to want to use that in situations where you really need to survive some heavy offensive cooldowns by an enemy team or a lot of people attacking you, or just, you know, buy yourself a little bit more time. Execute is your attempt to finish off a foe. Emphasis on the attempt part. It'll use up to a certain amount of rage. It requires 15 rage to use, or sorry, 20 rage to use in general, but it can use up to 40 rage to deal more damage. If your foe survives, you get refunded a little bit of that rage, and your foe will probably survive at Execute these days. But it's one of those abilities that you want to press when an enemy is low health. It's like one of those just warrior classic abilities, you know, where your enemy is getting low, you spam and Execute, try to finish them off. So you definitely want to have that one on your mind to try to bring a low health opponent down. And you have Hamstring. This is one of your basic just debuffs to slow your opponent. You're pretty much going to always have this up on your opponents. Even me, like nowadays, like sometimes I'll just run in there and try to deal damage, and if you forget to put a hamstring up, sometimes you get slowed and your opponent just walks away from you. So you definitely want to make sure you have a hamstring up. It doesn't deal a whole lot of damage, but the main thing is its utility in slowing your opponent down. Heroic Leap is a mobility skill with a slightly longer cooldown, but you have a little bit longer range to it. It's a 40-yard range. You can jump really, really far away to jump into combat, away from combat. You can use that as utility to create some distance or close distance, like I mentioned. A lot of times you're going to be saving this in arena to jump behind a pillar, to run away from, big offensive cooldowns from your opponent, or to jump behind a pillar, far away from you to stop an enemy healer from drinking, that sort of thing. But just basically one of those mobility skills that you have with a little bit more freedom than Charge, because Charge is a targeted ability. Heroic Leap, you have just a target that you put down. You get to choose where you jump rather than jumping specifically to an opponent. Heroic Throw really doesn't deal a whole lot of damage. This is another one of those things that you can just use to either, pull a mob, to hit an enemy. Like if a rogue is trying to go for a re-stealth far away from you, you can use a Heroic Throw to keep them in combat, denying a re-stealth. You can use this to break a drink attempt from an enemy team's healer in arena. That sort of thing. And sometimes, rarely, an opponent gets away with a teeny tiny sliver of health. A Heroic Throw plus a few ticks of your Deep Wounds and Rend Bleed can take them out. Intimidating Shout is your basic CC. It's actually insane to think that warriors don't have baseline any other CC than this, like actual CC. But this is our big one. It's a 1.5 minute cooldown. It causes the targeted enemy to cower in fear, meaning the enemy that you fear will not move. But up to 5 initial enemies within 8 yards will flee, which means that they will run away. So you can use this. This has some interesting utility sometimes. So basically, it's an 8-second fear. But how that works is, so if somebody is like in like a Disc Priest bubble or a Demon Hunter Darkness, and there's a target that you want to leave that little zone, you can fear a different target. If there's more than one target in the zone, you can fear a different target, which will make the target that you want to hit run away. So just use that to your advantage. And also similarly in comps like Hunter, Warrior, Healer, KFC, you can use obviously you can fear the target that you want. That target will stand still, allowing your Hunter to trap out of it. So it's just some interesting utility that you can use there. Mortal Strike. This is your bread and butter as an arms warrior. It used to be a much bigger deal when warriors didn't have Mortal Strike, or sorry, when other classes didn't have Mortal Strike and warriors were the only one with it. But this is still a cooldown that you want to use basically on cooldown, right? It reduces the effectiveness of healing it on a target by 25%, and it deals a fair amount of damage, as well as applying your Deep Wounds Bleed, which is kind of a big deal in terms of the way you deal damage as an arms warrior now. We're not as chunky damage, but it's a lot of consistent heavy pressure from bleeds and stuff like that. So this is a big one. Costs 30 rage, but has a lot of cool stuff that it does too. Overpower, this is another one of your rotational abilities. It doesn't really proc off of dodges like it does in, like, Classic or something like that, but it still cannot be blocked, dodged, or parried. It doesn't also have any longer extra critical strike chance, but it is just a rotational ability. What it actually does, though, it increases the damage of your next Mortal Strike by 20%, and it's stacking up to 2 times. So when as you'll notice, doesn't cost any rage, and it can proc off of spending rage with your Tactician passive, which we'll talk about in a second. So that's just one of your rotational abilities. It has a 12-second cooldown on it, but it can proc, and it makes it's an attack that does a bit of damage, doesn't cost any rage, and buffs your next Mortal Strike. So that's cool. Pummel. Pummel is your basic 15-second interrupt. It locks out a spell casting of that school that you lock out. You're going to want to use this to pummel scary spells like Chaos Bolt from a Destro Lock, Greater Pyroblast from Mage, or from CC. If you're going to get polymorphed or your healer's going to get polymorphed, you want to go ahead and pummel those abilities. Just your basic interrupt, and using that on spells that are important to interrupt is better than using it on spells that are not. So, for example, an Immolate from a Destro Lock, not that scary to pummel. Chaos Bolt, a little bit scarier, important to interrupt. So you want to use this intelligently, use this wisely, but you can use it on anything you want, and it'll lock out the school for 4 seconds. Rallying Cry. It's another one of our big, long cooldowns for defensive cooldowns. It'll give you a temporary 15% buff to your maximum health, and also buff your party or raid members for that much. It's one of those situations where when you're really, really low health, and maybe you need to buy yourself a few more seconds of survival time so that your healer can save you, Rallying Cry, or you can save your teammate. Rallying Cry is the is that last-ditch attempt to buy yourself a little bit more time. It's a very long cooldown for only a little bit of HP, but you can use an auto talent that makes it a shorter cooldown for more HP. But that's your second big defensive cooldown. So you have Rallying Cry and Die by the Sword, both 3-minute cooldowns. That's all you got. You got Rend, though. Rend is a talent that I've taken. We'll talk about that a little bit later. But it is basically just a 30 rage cost ability that puts a fairly high damage bleed on your target. Unfortunately, Rend damage does not scale with your Mastery Deep Wounds scaling, but I do think that it's worth the rage, especially when we look at the talents that are in that row. Rend is just usable at any HP amount. And it consistently can help you do damage, and Arms Warriors right now do seem to be mostly about that consistent heavy pressure, and not a lot about chunk damage. So it's just one of those things that adds to that effect. Sharpened Blade is a PvP talent that I do recommend you use in just about every situation. It's one of those really big utility aspects of Arms Warrior that makes it desirable in a PvP. Is when activated, your next Mortal Strike will deal 15% increased damage, which is fine. The main thing is that you're going to be reducing healing taken by your target by 50%. Usually Mortal Strike effects are only 25. I believe that Assassination Rogue can have like 30 almost or something like that. But with Sharpened Blade on a 25-second cooldown, which is, it's on a cooldown, but it's a fairly short cooldown. Sharpened Blade is one of those things that definitely helps you apply that pressure as an Arms Warrior and helps that sort of heavy, consistent damage be a little bit harder to deal with. Strong PvP talent, do recommend. Slam is basically like, if you don't have any other abilities to press, if Hamstring's up, if Rend is up, you don't have any offensive cooldowns to use, you've Mortal Strike's on cooldown, Overpower hasn't procced, you can't execute somebody, you might as well press Slam. That's basically how it works on its own. There are Azerite traits like Crushing Assault that make Slam a little bit more effective. Then you can press Slam on proc, but generally I don't recommend using Slam a whole lot. Outside of when it's the only thing that's available to use. It doesn't cost that much damage. It only costs 20 rage, but you're basically just using that to move your rotation along. Not a high priority ability, but something that you will be using fairly often. I mean, you can use it to kill totems and things like that. Just little binks, knock out a Capacitator totem, knock out a grounding totem, things like that. But not going to be an ability that you're going to want to use over things like Overpower or Mortal Strike, unless it's procced. But we'll talk about that later. Stormbolt. This is another talent that you have to take, but it is basically your second hard CC, right? That's like, you have Fear, which isn't really even a hard CC because it will break the damage, but then you have Stormbolt, finally, a 30-second cooldown, only a 20-yard range, but it stuns for 4 seconds and does a little bit of damage. This is your basic, like, you're doing PvP, you need to stun something, that's what it is. You can either chuck this at a healer to stun them for 4 seconds, you can use this to stun a target that you're attacking to keep them in place. To deny them is basically you use that like they're stunned. You have a little bit of utility with that one, but it is a talent you have to take. But we'll talk about talents briefly. Sweeping Strikes. This is a fun little utility offensive CD, I would call it. It's not like something that's going to increase your single target damage all that much, but it helps you really create some pressure. So when things are stacked up, say you just blasted them with a Warbreaker, you pop Sweeping Strikes. You can get your Sharpened Blade swept onto both targets. You can Rend both targets. You can Hamstring both targets, because for the next 12 seconds, your single target damaging abilities hit one additional target within 8 yards for 75% damage. But it also applies the on-hit effects, right? So the Rend can cleave to 2 targets. Your Mortal Strike effect can cleave to 2 targets, and that Sharpened Blade effect can cleave to 2 targets. So you can use this Sweeping Strikes. I would recommend you use this when you actually have some cool stuff that you can cleave to, right? So Sweeping Strikes is a 30-second cooldown. Sharpened Blade is a 25-second cooldown. Using those things together is pretty nice. And we'll get there in like just 2 seconds. But Warbreaker, you can use Warbreaker to make your Colossus Smash AoE, but you can also use not Warbreaker, and Colossus Smash will still cleave to 2 targets with Sweeping Strikes. So you have some cool things that you can do with Sweeping Strikes. It is on global cooldown, so you can't use it in a macro with other things on global, but it's one of those things that you can do to just increase that steady, heavy AoE bleed pressure that Arms Warrior does right now. Taunt doesn't have a whole lot of PvP utility, but I do put this in like on my Mortal Strike macro, which is an ability that I press often, and you can just do at like Arena Pet. I'll show you in a little bit. To just taunt Arena Pets to you to make it easier for you to put bleeds on them, which just annoys the enemy team if you kill their Warlock pets or their Hunter pets. It also allows you to get victory rushes off those pets, which is nice, and so you're decreasing the utility of the enemy team. You know, sometimes, you know, even Hunter Cleaves, they do rely on the Mortal Strike effect from the Hunter pet on their kill target. So if you're able to taunt the pet, it Mortal Strikes you instead of the thing that they're trying to actually kill, then that gives your healer a chance to get some extra heals on their intended kill target, and you really don't suffer from that at all. So it's just one of those things that you can do to be annoying and also gain some utility for your team while decreasing the enemy team's utility, basically. Victory Rush is our only, which doesn't really happen in Arena all that much, unless you're killing the Arena, like, unless you're killing, like, Water Elementals, Hunter pets, Warlock pets, things like that. But it is still pretty cool. You do a little bit of damage, and you heal yourself for 20% of your maximum health. Lovely in BGs. Be a friend, give your warrior friends killing blows. Because we need them. But that's basically what you do. Once you get a kill, you victory rush to heal yourself a little bit. Definitely usable out in the world. Definitely helpful out in the world. But and in PvP, not super often used in Arena. But definitely you love to get those KBs and BGs and victory rush back a little bit of health to keep you in the combat, keep you battling, keep you racking up more KBs. So Warbreaker, basically our big offensive cooldown. It does a big hit as well as debuffing our opponents, making them take more physical damage from you, which bleeds our physical damage. So, you know, you're stacking up a big hit from Warbreaker. But by default, it's Colossus Smash. I should mention that. By default, this ability is called Colossus Smash, but you can take a talent called Warbreaker, which just makes it AoE. Which is nice. But it deals a heavy chunk of damage as well as debuffing your opponent, like I said. You're going to want to use this before big hits. Like maybe you've got like 2 stacks of Overpower and a Sharpened Blade coming up. Warbreaker into a big old Mortal Strike hit, things like that. And especially, you know, like I said, it was using Sweeping Strikes is nice to Warbreaker into Sweeping Strikes, cleaving your Rend and your Mortal Strike everywhere, as well as dropping a huge Warbreaker into Blade Storm. So you can kind of string these abilities together. Like a lot of times you're going to see like a big DPS combo would be like an Avatar into a Warbreaker into a Blade Storm, right? Everything around you is going to be taking massive amounts of damage from bleeds and from Blade Storm ticks, as well as taking a big hit from Warbreaker. So we can talk about that when we go over rotation a bit. Whirlwind, I really honestly don't use this too often, but it is an AoE ability. Maybe if you want to like Whirlwind a rogue out of stealth, maybe if you're in a Nova, you can't quite hit mage, you can just Whirlwind in frustration. Maybe he'll be 8 yards away from you and you can attack him, but you can't, you know, hit him with any other abilities. That's a possibility. I think Whirlwind does have a lot of use in PvE if you play the Fervor of Battle talent. We're about to get into talents right now. But generally, I don't use this ability too much, but it is on my bar. It's kind of in the same category as Slam. Not going to use this too much for single target damage, and I don't even necessarily recommend using it for, like, if people are stacked up in a BG, I don't really recommend Whirlwinding that much. You might just be better off using your basic rotation and trying to kill the one target that you're working on. But if you like Whirlwinding, go for it. Mastery. Our Mastery is Deep Wounds, which means that our Execute, Blade Storm, and Mortal Strike inflict deep wounds on a target, which applies a fairly heavy bleed that doesn't take a whole lot of time to deal its full damage. So you'll see here, right now my warrior has a ton of mastery on it. We can talk about that a little bit when we get into stats. But that makes my deep wounds do 300% more damage, which puts it at a 27,000 damage bleed. That, of course, is reduced in PvP. It's not, there's not a tooltip that tells you that, but it is. Still does a fair amount of damage. I think it's reduced by like maybe 25%. I could be wrong in PvP, but still worthwhile. Still a good amount of damage. And when you look at your damage breakdown, you'll see that a ton of it is deep wounds. So that's just something to keep in mind. Seasoned Soldier, your auto attacks, criticals generate 30% more rage. So this is one of those things that's really kind of more a thing for like PvE. This is where haste crit really comes into play for PvE. But as you get better gear, as there's just more secondary stats on gear, you can afford to get a little bit more crit on your gear. So crit is reduced by 50% in PvP. So when you hit a crit in PvE, it's unreduced. You're going to be dealing like double damage. For PvP, you're going to be dealing like half again damage. So crit's not super valuable of a stat, but for rage generation, it is still nice for PvP. Having a nice constant rage gen, a constant, you know, smooth rotation, because everything that you do as arms does cost rage, unlike Fury. So your rotation can get a little clunky if you don't have rage. But Seasoned Soldier is one of those things that kind of helps you keep that rage income flowing, and it is, you know, beneficial to have a little bit more crit for that. Just something to think about. Just to understand your class. Tactician. Speaking of rage, you have a 1.4 percent chance per rage spent on damaging abilities to reset the remaining cooldown on Overpower. That's like I was saying, Overpower can have a chance to proc. So it's just Spending Rage gives you a chance to proc an ability that does a little bit of damage, doesn't cost any rage, and buffs your next Mortal Strike. This can be especially nice if you have a Azerite talent called Strike the Anvil, which will make your Overpower do a little bit more damage when it procs from Tactician, as well as reduce the cooldown of Mortal Strike. I love that talent, and we can talk about that a little bit more when we get into Azerite talents, when we get into that. But that's basically our abilities for Arms Warrior. Kind of break those down, give you a look at your offensive abilities, your rotational abilities, your CCs, things like that. But with that taken care of, I think we can move into talents a little bit and continue the discussion. All right, team, so we broke down our basic abilities. Some of those abilities were talents, some of them were augmented by talents, and now I want to talk about exactly which talents I recommend and use for PvP. So this setup right here is basically what I will use in most situations for PvP. At times, there's one talent that I will change in and out of, and that's In for the Kill and Avatar. In for the Kill is just one of those things that basically increases your, just kind of keeps you rolling, grants you a little bit of haste. It's nice for just if you're going to have to grind up a team, not necessarily push them over with Avatar, or don't have roots to worry about. But everything else, essentially, is fairly standard, and I'll tell you why. So, Sudden Death is the primary talent that I'll use. Makes Execute, well, it makes Execute have a chance to proc, and allow you to use that ability without it costing any rage, but it will deal damage as if you had that full 40 rage to deal damage with. I don't really prefer War Machine or Skull Splitter for PvP. This can be kind of fun for BGs, but the extra rage generated by auto attacks and the extra ability that grants you a hit that generates rage, I think fails in comparison to Sudden Death. Just in the fact that Sudden Death is a nice chunk of damage. It applies your bleed as well. Really solid choice for PvP. By all means, just with the full scope of this guide, definitely continue to use whatever you like. But Sudden Death is what I use. Sudden Death is what I recommend. Moving on, Double Time. Double Time has some very niche utility there, and the fact that you can charge twice. It also reduces the cooldown of your charge overall. Generally, Stormbolt is going to be the choice here, right? Impending Victory, once again, small heal, but then you're not going to have Stormbolt anyway. I think that, small aside, I'm not trying to complain too much. One of the main criticisms I have about Arms Warrior is how locked into talents so much of our utility is, right? So, we need Stormbolt. We can't take any of this stuff. That's just how it is. So, having a heal would be nice. Having an extra chance or an extra charge would be nice. Reduced cooldown would be cool. But basically, Stormbolt is what you're going to end up using the most. A stun is just way too much utility to give up. Even if you did have a chance to double time charge, you're still very slow. You're still very waddly as an Arms Warrior. And even if you had Impending Victory, it's still a 30-second cooldown that only heals you for 20% of your HP and costs rage. So it's just not enough self-healing to be worthwhile, and it's not enough ability to be worthwhile. The stun, gives you way more utility and is basically vital, and it should be baseline, arguably. But it's a talent, so we take it. This row right here, Massacre, 35% health, is probably my second favorite talent in this tier. Definitely can be a lot of fun in BGs, especially when paired with Death Sentence, the honor talent. We'll talk about that in a bit. It allows you to execute targets that are below 35% health rather than 20% health. Now, this would be a lot more devastating if the execute actually did significant amount of damage. Execute right now, it's very common for you to probably put about 5 executes into a target and not have it die. So having that execute frustration begin at 35% rather than 20% is sometimes fun, just mostly for the mobility of charging around executing. And also, if you don't like the rotation of Rend, you can just go Massacre. Not a bad thing, not a bad talent, but I think that Massacre really, this talent really only is effective between the ranges of 20% HP and 15% HP. Whereas Rend is effective at all HP values. It helps you start the fight when they're at 100% health, and it helps you finish the fight when they're at, 5% health. It doesn't have as much finishing power as Massacre, perhaps, but it's always useful. It doesn't have to rely on an HP value to gain utility. And Fervor of Battle, I think this is like something I haven't really experimented with. I kind of want to mess around with it in PvP just for fun in like BGs, but I don't recommend it for PvP in general. I think it's like super rage intensive, obviously spamming Whirlwind, and it's also kind of like, it's just weird because I don't really feel like when you're gonna use this, it's not like super often like that you're gonna slam in PvP anyway unless you have a proc. So I feel like its effectiveness is kind of funny, and that you're going to be constantly AoEing. But I feel like if you're pressing Whirlwind a whole lot, you're also losing out on like Overpower and Mortal Strike and things like that. I think that in order to get the most out of this, you need to be Whirlwinding a ton, and you're just not your rotation is not that way for PvP. I feel, but I think it's potentially good in PvE, so I could do some research on that and maybe kind of mess around with that in PvP as well. But generally, Rend is the go-to. Like I said, it does a little bit of upfront damage, but the primary effectiveness is its bleed damage. You know, this is just one of those debuffs that you want to have on your target when you're dealing damage. It's just part of that rotation. It's not like Fury where like you're going to be pressing the same button a ton over and over. Like you're not going to be like Bloodthirst, Raging Blow, back to Bloodthirst, Rampage, and then just like have like a super fast rotation. It's a little bit slower for sure. And Rend doesn't have a cooldown on it on its own. But it's not an ability that you want to spam, right? Because it's up for 12 seconds. You Rend, you're good. You can go back to Overpower, Mortal Strike, keeping your hamstring up, slamming occasionally, execute proc, and then Rend again, right? You have some downtime, and Rend just sort of fits that pretty well. This tier, Second Wind. I mean, as an Arms Warrior, maybe you're gonna be able to leap behind a pillar. Let's say you have no bleeds on you, no pets coming to attack you, nothing. You can leap behind a pillar, and you can Second Wind to full. Kind of funny, really unlikely to happen in PvP. Bounding Stride, maybe you're just saying, F it, we've been fighting this Mistweaver Monk constantly, we can't kill their DPS, we're just going to go balls to the wall, go Bounding Stride, run after this Mistweaver Monk, and hope for the best, throw caution to the wind. Could be a thing that you decided to use, if Defensive Stance wasn't a talent. I think once again, falls into the same category as Stormbolt. Defensive Stance should not be a talent. But it is, so you have to take it. Because if you don't have these stance, you're gonna die. Basically, you're just gonna get trained into the dirt and die. And unfortunately, one of the sad things about Arms Warrior is you can still get trained into the dirt and die in defensive stance while also dealing less damage. The tooltip says all damage you deal is reduced by 10% until canceled. I'm fairly certain that it is still the case that you actually are taking less damage. Taking 20% less damage, but also doing 20% less damage in PvP. I could be wrong about that, but I don't think I am. So defensive stance, you got to remember, it's going to reduce the damage that you deal as well. So spending a lot of time in D stance is going to heavily reduce the amount of damage that you deal, but it's better than being dead. You don't deal any damage when you're dead, right? So D stance is pretty much a non-negotiable PvP talent, unless there's very specific situations where you would use these two, and that's the case with all this stuff. These are the talents that I use. These are the talents I recommend. They're the strongest, but if you understand what your talents do, you can make specific decisions in certain situations to use other stuff for a certain purpose, and that's fine too. But D-Stance is basically your bread and butter as an Arms Warrior. You need it. This talent tier, I pretty much use Warbreaker all the time. The only time I'm not using Warbreaker is if I'm playing a comp that has breakable CC, like Warrior Mage or KFC, where there's a situation where, let's say we land a full trap or a full polymorph on an enemy team's healer, the guy that we're hitting goes and stands right next to him, and I can't Warbreaker to deal damage to kill them. I don't want that. I don't want to be able to not use Colossus Smash because they're standing next to their healer. So you actually can go like something like Collateral Damage, which is not really gonna, it's not gonna get a whole lot of utility out of it. You could go Cleave if you wanted to, but I don't really feel like making a keybind for Cleave, honestly, and having hit 3 or more targets in Arena where I'm oftentimes only using single target abilities. It's just like, I'll take Collateral Damage basically so that Warbreaker isn't forced on me, right? That's kind of how it works, and it's another kind of like wonky situation. But like, I feel like what would be better is if Warbreaker was the default, and then you could use Colossus Smash as like a talent, which made Colossus Smash deal more damage single target instead of it just making it AOE. But you like condense the AOE damage and make it more powerful single target, but you lose the ability to AOE it unless you Sweeping Strikes it. That'd probably be a more interesting talent. But this is what we've got. So Warbreaker is pretty much what you always use. A lot of times Warrior comps are AOE friendly anyway. But if you need to use Colossus Smash to only deal single target damage, take Collateral, because it just makes your Sweeping Strikes give you a little bit more rage. So usually you're going to be doing single target, but if you ever do Sweeping Strikes to do AoE, at least you get a little bit more rage refund. But generally Warbreaker is the call. Big offensive cooldown. AoE blast people, big damage. It's nice. Like I said, this talent tier, generally, I'll swap between In for the Killer Avatar. I'm currently spec'd for Avatar, partially because it's cool, partially because I have a Azerite talent that I kind of have to use. We'll talk about my Azerite stuff here pretty soon. But In for the Kill is pretty nice. Warbreaker increases your haste by 10%. for 10 seconds, unless somebody is low, and then it'll increase. If they're below 20% health and you use it, it'll increase your haste by 20%. So in for the kill, right? It helps you with some finishing power there. It makes your bleeds tick faster and makes you spend a little bit more rage. So it has some really nice utility with anger management. But I think Avatar is pretty solid. Like I said, just breaking out of a root is nice, but giving yourself increased damage of 20% is also pretty freaking cool. I think I've used Deadly Calm once on accident this expansion. I don't recommend it. It reduces the rage cost of all your abilities by 100% for 6 seconds, so it's like, you can do like, you don't spend rage on like, maybe you want to Mortal Strike something, and then Rend, and then Slam, and then those abilities are free, but you just get so much more out of these talents, I believe. So I don't recommend Deadly Calm, but hey, if you love it, if you're like, dude, Deadly Calm, 3 slams in a row, let's go. You want to do that? Do it. You know, that's fine. But I don't recommend it. I think Avatar is probably the best of the best for me right now. But in for the kill, like these are both really good. Use them both. I just currently have Avatar for me in my setup. Anger management, pretty much non-negotiable. Every 20 rage you spend reduces the remaining cooldown of Warbreaker and Bladestorm by a whole second. So right now your Bladestorm and Warbreaker, 45-second cooldown. Bladestorm's a minute and a half on its own, but I have some fun setup to make it much shorter than that. But you're spending rage constantly as an arms warrior, so this comes down substantially. And that's once again, it just sort of fits into that arms warrior thing. You have some burst. Depending on how you change your stats up, you can have more or less burst. But Warbreaker is one of those things that you're like doing heavy consistent damage with bleeds. Your rotation, boom, Warbreaker. And then the more you're spending rage, more you're doing your damage, boom, another Warbreaker comes up. So in for the kill, you can kind of see how that works with extra haste. You get those cooldowns back up faster, but anger management, the more you're in the battle, the more you're able to do your thing as an arms warrior, the scarier you become. Love this talent, recommend it. Hard number 1. Dreadnought. Overpower has 2 charges, and it increases the damage of your next Mortal Strike by an additional 10%. This was a really fun talent when Executioner's Precision was a thing. So you had 2 abilities that were really buffing your Mortal Strike. That's no longer a thing. Really don't recommend Dreadnought. Not a lot of your damage comes from Mortal Strike anyway. And even if it does, I feel like you're better off with Anger Management. You're going to get a bigger burst from Warbreaker anyway, not like a big Mortal Strike. So don't recommend Dreadnought, but if you like it, if you really like that playstyle, go for it, have fun with it. Ravager. This may still have PvE utility. I'm not sure. Probably hilarious with Vision of Perfection, an essence that procs Bladestorm for you. It can also proc Ravager, so you're just running around doing damage and you just randomly, plop a Ravager on the ground. I mean, that could be really funny. People usually, but generally people will just walk out of Ravager. It's not going to do a whole lot. Maybe it has some utility with Ursul's Vortex, some very specific situations where this can be useful. But generally, not the talent you're going to take, right? Not the talent you're going to take. That breaks down the basic talents. Hopefully that helps you guys understand that. Let's talk about PvP talents a little bit, just in the same breath, right? So your trinket options. Generally, I'd recommend using just normal PvP trinket. As a human, I like to use Relentless because it reduces the cooldown of all other CCs, or just all CCs in general. And then I have my human trinket, Every Man for Himself, on a 3-minute cooldown. It is a longer cooldown to break out of stuns, but it's just fun in BGs. You're gonna get hit by like a billion CCs. It just makes them a little bit shorter. If you're fighting something like RMP, Rogue Mage Priest, or Rogue Mage Paladin, Rogue Mage Druid, stuff does. Let me just take the easiest one. Just take Gladiator's Medallion. When you're in a CC that you don't like, trinket it. You have 5 seconds or more. This effect can only occur once every minute. So if you're against a team where there's a particular type of bashes against druids, things like that. But I will say that it's very easy for certain classes to set you up, right? So let's say that you're fighting against a rogue and a mage, right? The mage just throws a no cooldown polymorph on you. It's longer than 5 seconds. Boom, you're trinketed out of the polymorph. You get out of it, and then they just kidney you and kill you, right? So those are the 2 that I prefer. Adaptation, once again, if you understand how these abilities work, you can put them into use in situations that you like. But generally, recommend Relentless or Gladiator's Medallion, just because those are pretty cool. Other honor talents. What I have here is basically what I use in BGs. I was using BGs most recently, and this is a fun combo. These are very offensive talents, right? We'll just go down the line actually instead of Tom, but you can use like Disarm and Master and Commander as peels. This is just a defensive talent. Warband of the Hodge and disrupt the CC chain right off the bat. That's kind of fun too. It basically makes any incoming CC after the Warbander is down a 50% less duration. It also makes you run faster, so you can just chuck a Warband down and run at somebody, but that's not like the best use of it, but you can do it. Hey, you can play how you want. So Warband is a really cool talent. 1.5 minute cooldown. That really allows you to bust up some CC chains. So you want to play this against a team that's going to have a long CC chain or a lot of CC. Like, so against a Hunter, right? Your healer gets stunned. You know the Hunter trap's coming. You can chuck a Warbander down. Hopefully they don't kill it before the trap lands, and you get a nice little reduction on the CC. And your team, survives one of those scary situations. 1.5 minutes, right? Duel. Duel is another one of those strong defensive cooldowns. It's a 1 minute cooldown where basically the target that you duel will deal 50% damage to everybody except you. Right? But it also applies to you, so you'll deal less damage to everybody else. So basically, in a situation like, you're fighting against like an assassination rogue, right? They pop Vendetta. You disarm them, first things first, and then you can duel them afterwards. Because you can hit the rogue. If the rogue is hitting anything else but you, it's going to deal 50% less damage. Or you see a Chaos Bolt being cast on your friend, and you can't stop the Chaos Bolt, you don't have any interrupts, but you can duel it, right? It'll make that Chaos Bolt deal less damage, make that Greater Pyroblast deal less damage. So these big abilities, or these big offensive cooldowns can be mitigated by dueling that, right? So it's one of those PvP talents that you want to use defensively. So once again, I feel like this is a little bit confusing that I'm using these talents right here, because so often as an arms warrior, you're going to be like Sharpened Blade and like 2 defensive talents. Or you can play a certain PvP essence, which is awesome, and you can use 3 defensive talents if you want to, and still have Sharpened Blade just built in from the essence. So we'll talk about that soon. I don't want to get too far ahead of ourselves. There's a lot to talk about, and I'm trying to break it up, but a lot of things overlap, which is kind of cool. But that's dual. Spell Reflection falls into the same situation as Stormbolt D-Stance. This should not be a PvP talent. This should be a talent that you have baseline, but it's a talent. So anytime you fight a caster, you're gonna have to use Spell Reflection. You have to use one of your PvP talents on Spell Reflection. You raise your shield, deflecting all spells cast on you last 3 seconds. So it's not like a catches the next spell, and then Spell Reflection is done. It'll reflect everything. So kind of cool. It's on a 25-second cooldown. You're going to want to use this to reflect, CC. You're going to want to use this to reflect big, scary damage. Once again, that Chaos Bolt, Greater Pyroblast comes to mind. You're going to want to reflect, things that spells that you don't want to hit you, reflect it, right? Basically, that's how it works. Cool talent. Definitely, essentially mandatory against pretty much any caster that's going to deal damage to you, or can CC you. But it's also good to use it in situations like if you're fighting like a Resto Druid, Unholy DK, right? Things like that. In any Resto Druid team, you might want to use it against it to reflect Roots, or Cyclones, or Thorns. Thorns hurts. Reflecting Thorns damage is kind of nice to keep you from dying and doing extra damage to your opponent. But pretty much mandatory. Death Sentence. So this is the fun one. It makes execute of a 15-yard range, so when you're in BGs and there's targets that are low HP, you just charge all over the map, executing them down, as long as you have rage to do it. Pretty fun, pretty cool. I don't use it in Arena a whole lot, but it's a lot of fun in BGs. Disarm, another one of those powerful defensive cooldowns that you have. Anytime your opponent, you see him popping cooldowns, yoink, give me that weapon, and then they can't attack for a little while, or they can trinket it, right? Very annoying. It's a 45-second cooldown, and it disarms them for 6 seconds. Ours is only melee range. Monk can disarm you from across the map for some reason. Boom can disarm you for 8 seconds with magic, but you, as an arms warrior, have to be next to somebody to take their weapon away from them, so still worth using. Like I said, a simple situation of you see Vendetta popped, boom, disarmed. You see somebody Warbreaker, boom, disarmed, right? That kind of stuff. It just really annoys your opponent, reduces the damage that they deal to you, so that your damage can consistently, slowly tip them over, right? Solid PvP talent to use against a lot of melee DPS. I mean, obviously, like things like Demon Hunters, Windwalker Monks, they don't really deal a whole lot of, they don't really need a weapon that much. But things like DKs, Warriors, probably Rep Paladins, Rogues for sure, sometimes Survival Hunters. Like, a lot of these classes, like, they don't really suffer as hard from a disarm as we do as Warriors, but still sometimes worth thinking about, worth using. Storm of Destruction, I love this PvP talent. I love it. It reduces the cooldown of Bladestorm by 33%, first of all, and Bladestorm now applies basically Mortal Wound, Mortal Strike to all targets you hit. So everything you Bladestorm not only takes a bunch of dot damage, but also has healing reduction on it too. Really, really fun for BGs. Really, really fun for Arena too, honestly. And it also reduces the cooldown of it, which is sick because you have Anger Management reducing the cooldown of your Bladestorm. You have Storm of Destruction reducing the cooldown of it, and you also have an Azerite Essence called Vision of Perfection that reduces the cooldown of your Bladestorm even further and can proc it. Got a lot of questions about that recently. Like, what is proccing your Bladestorm? It's Essence of Perfection, or Vision of Perfection. I'll show it to you. But this is a really cool talent. It's hard to budget for this sometimes, but if you're using like a super offensive setup, you can do it. And if you're using the PvP Essence, you can do it too. The Arena Essence, I'll show it to you. Sharpened Blade, we talked about this a lot already. Really solid offensive utility. Pretty much your bread and butter as an Arms Warrior. One of those things that makes you something people even want to play with. Because why would I play with a Warrior when I could play with a Windwalker Monk? Well, one of those things that you can say is, I have Sharpened Blade, and they're like, all right, come on. Okay, fine. But yeah, Sharpened Blade is a PvP talent you're going to want to lock in pretty much all the time, with a few exceptions. And especially now that you have the PvP Essence, the Arena Essence, you can use Sharpened Blade pretty much all the time and still have 3 honor talents to work with for defensive or offensive utility. But that's pretty much going through our talents. I think the next thing we could talk about a little bit is like stats and Azerite gear. Let's get to it. All right, with our abilities and our talents out of the way, this next segment is going to focus on all things gear related. First things first, let's just break down stats because that's pretty easy, pretty straightforward, because there's kind of like only 2 ways to go with this for me. First things first, you're going to want to have 20% haste. More than that is nice. I like more than 20% haste. I don't recommend going less than 20% haste because then Arms Warrior kind of already feels, or it can feel a little slow, a little clunky on its own. More haste can kind of make that feel better. Less haste can kind of make that feel worse. So 20% haste is kind of like that break point where things start to feel pretty good. I'd really shoot for 20% haste first things first, and then you have kind of 2 paths that you can go. I think ideally, Arms Warriors stack versatility. Versatility makes you take a little bit less damage, makes you deal more damage. Versatility is going to be a burstier build because you're going to allow those big hits from Warbreaker and Crushing Assault slams and double stacked overpower Sharpened Blade Mortal Strikes to really hit hard, as well as buffing your bleed damage too. So I would recommend versatility as that thing to shoot for. Alternatively, you can do what I've done here with my stats, just because that's the gear that I've gotten, and you can stack a whole lot of mastery. So you're really just giving in to this Deep Wounds idea with mastery, because once again, what does your mastery do? It buffs your Deep Wounds damage. So, well, let me battle shout real quick. We've been at it for an hour already. I guess battle shout fell off, of course. Hey, this is a Bajheera guide. You guys are getting it, right? Get what you paid for here. Whole bunch of chat about Warrior, but anyway, you're gonna do a whole lot of bleed damage, right? So Mortal Strike applies your bleed, Execute applies your bleed, Bladestorm applies your bleed. So that's basically what's going on here. I have a fair amount of haste, I have a ton of mastery, I only have a little bit of verse, and I have a actually 15% crit compared to what Arms Warriors have had in BFA so far for PvP. Is actually a respectable amount of crit. This could be upwards of 20%. If you have a ton of crit and you want to work with that, if you like the way, you know, crit makes your rage generation feel, go for it. If you like seeing crits pop up on your screen, I got you. But generally, crit is not the stat that I really want to go for. I would say it's probably like haste, verse, mastery, crit. That's basically how that works. Crit is going to be kind of like incidental, I would say, honestly. A lot of times you have like 10% crit or less or something like that. You can, especially if you stack like verse. But with my build like this, I've got a ton of mastery. Because the way I've got my character set up right now is I'm just like doing, you know, just BG blasting. I've just got, you know, I just want to hit big blade storms on everybody and bleed everybody out. And it's kind of fun. It makes it, because the Arms Warrior doesn't have like a ton of uptime sometimes. So whenever you hit somebody, you really make it count by applying your Mortal Strike, applying your bleed, applying your rend, and then even if you can't constantly make contact with that target, they're constantly bleeding and you're dealing damage that way. So that's nice. Once again, I think primarily I'd recommend versatility, but if you're like me and you run the raids and you do PvP and you just get a ton of mastery here, you're like, you know what, let's just go for it. Let's just go for like a haste mastery build, tons of bleeds, and have fun with that. That's fine. And the way that all sort of works together, I suppose, is we can move into some of the Azerite essences, because this is something that's new for 8.2. Really cool stuff. I made a video reading through these already, but I suppose for the Warrior Guide, it's going to be a long video. We may as well get right into it. So, some of my favorite ones. Memory of Lucid Dreams. This is really powerful for the major power, for sure. But I think the Miner power is one of those things that is the coolest thing about it. So at rank 3, you clear your mind and attune yourself with the Heart of Azeroth, whatever. But you basically have 100% extra rage gen, and you get a little bit of leech. Unfortunately, I don't feel like this amount of leech is really enough to heal you a ton, but it can it's more like a mitigation tool, honestly. But the passive from the Miner is what is so cool about it. Your spells and abilities have a chance to refund 50% rage spent on them, and Arms spends a ton of rage, and it heals you a little bit, and increases your versatility for 8 seconds. So this is like a really solid Miner trait that I'd pretty much recommend using all the time. That's why I have it as a Miner talent for me. Unbound Force, I don't use this one. It's just a crit buff, basically, which is cool. If you want crit and you can, you know, deal some damage with it. It's not something that I really use for PvP. Blood of the Enemy, I have only just recently, I haven't really been able to do that many BGs because we've been having some weird issues with Battlegrounds only in terms of like lag, but the lag has gotten a little bit better. We got to grind out some BGs yesterday and got rank 2 of this. This thing becomes very powerful at rank 3 because the major on use effect of it increases your critical hit damage. Not only critical hit chance, but critical hit damage by 25% for 5 seconds. So you pop this bad boy. Basically, you pop Avatar. Then you pop this bad boy. And so usually, like, I would probably Warbreaker at, like, then do this to get the damage of it. But what you should probably do, once you get that critical hit damage thing, is use this first, then Warbreaker, to make your Warbreaker have a better chance to crit and deal more damage, and Warbreaker does more damage than this thing anyway, and then Bladestorm, right? So you're going to be able to get, like, a teeny bit of that, right? 5 seconds, Warbreaker, and then a couple ticks of Bladestorm with huge crit damage and huge crit chance. Pretty darn cool. Not what I'd recommend usually, but definitely is, like, one of those things that, like I said, like, you use this in BGs to have fun with it, right? Just get in there, just Avatar, Blood of the Enemy, Warbreaker, Bladestorm. Your people are going to get shredded, especially if you put it in, like, a big pack of enemies. Oh my goodness, that'll be so much fun for montages and stuff. But it's not my main pick. Condensed Life Force, this is like what, like the healing one or something like that? No, you call it Guardian of Azeroth. I think it does a lot of damage. I don't really recommend using it usually, but I mean, like, or maybe I should say that I don't use it usually. But the rank 3 of it, when an Azerite spike deals damage, all damage you deal against target is increased by 5%. That's pretty cool. That's pretty cool. However, it's not something I'm going to use a ton for PvP, but for PvE, it could be pretty cool. The PvP setup I have, I'll show it to you. It's kind of the one I like the most. We'll talk about it. But this could be a fun one just because it increases all damage that you deal against target by 5% for 6 seconds. Pretty cool. Pretty cool. Not going to be like the most damage, I don't think, but it's okay. This one is probably going to be the one that ends up being my primary essence that I use like all the time. Right now, we have a major and we have a minor. Eventually, we're going to have 2 minors, and then things could get kind of interesting from there. But this one is pretty darn cool, because basically what it does is the major power, and this is probably the one I'd probably recommend using in Arena the most, is the major power grants you Sharpened Blade, regardless of the situation, right? So you get to use that in PvE, which is whatever, but you get to use that basically to get another PvP talent, and Sharpened Blade is probably one of your best. It's like one of your baseline PvP talents. So you get that for free, and then you can use other PvP talents too. You can use, like, you know, you could say you're fighting a melee cleave, you can use the big Rallying Cry, you can use Disarm, and you can use Storm of Destruction too to cleave them down and debuff them all. Like, that's really cool stuff, as well as having Sharpened Blade. But not only that, it also gives you a chance to stack up a fair amount of versatility. It only stacks to 5 at rank 2. I think next week I get rank 3 of it, which is cool, which makes it give me 3 additional, I think, right? Is that how that works? Yeah, it gives me 3 additional stacks, so you get 8 stacks of versatility. And versatility, is, once again, is a really powerful stat for Arms Warriors, so it's really, really nice to be able to have that. So looking forward to that one. Getting rank 3, and right now I'm using Vision of Perfection, which we're going to get to in a bit, but I recommend this one as a major talent. If you don't know what to take, or if you want something just really solid, Conflict and Strife is a very powerful pick, not only because it gives you Sharpened Blade, because it gives you all that verse too. Essence of Focusing Iris, kind of cheesy for PvP, can be a lot of fun. Don't necessarily recommend this, but it is fantastic in like Mythic Plus, right? There's a big old Destructo Beam that deals damage on a 1.5 minute cooldown. You can be kicked on it, so heads up. And another little point about this in Cyclotronic Burst, there's a charge up time and then an unleashing of the damage for both Cyclotronic and Essence. What you want to do is you want to let the cast go off and then kick it, right? Because it won't go on cooldown if you kick the charge up, the little charge up phase, right? A 1.1 second cast, if you kick that, it doesn't go on cooldown, they can just use it again. What you want to do is you want to let it charge up, boop, and then it goes burn to do the damage, right? So don't kick the boop, kick the burn, all right? If there's one thing you remember from this guide, don't kick the boop, kick the burn, all right? That's what you want to do. So for that and Cyclotronic, just something to keep in mind. Once again, to focus a little bit more, I don't use this usually for PvP, but it could be really fun in BGs. And the haste is also nice, but you might be swapping targets a lot as arms to, like, you know, tab rend somebody. So you're gonna lose those haste stacks if you don't attack the target again, right? So something to keep in mind. Crucible of Flame is actually pretty darn cool. It does a fair amount of damage that stacks up, and also you can use that as a healing thing for you too, which is pretty cool since arms warriors don't really have any healing. This gives you an opportunity to have an ability that does damage or heals you depending on the situation. And it's fairly straightforward, but I don't think it's bad. I haven't really used it a ton, but I don't think it's bad at all. And I'm going to get that rank 3 at level 60, and we're not too far away from that because I'm level 58 on my necklace right now. So could be something to try out for sure. The extra damage that it deals isn't, like, insane, but it is kind of cool, especially because this thing can stack up, right? the little passive fire dot can stack up, just gives you another bleed, basically, as an arms warrior. So it could be good for little extra deeps. This one is really, really fun. And once again, I haven't been talking about how you get all these. This is from, like, leveling up your guy in Nazjatar. This one is from Rep with the Nazjatar dudes. This is from grinding BGs for Honor. This is from the Raid. This is from Arena. This is from Mythic Plus. This is from leveling up your necklace. This is from Mechagon. But of course, you guys can go in through and read all these things. I just don't mind talking through the utilities, what I should be focusing on, how it can be helpful for you. But as with all of this stuff, I encourage you guys to be students of the game. I encourage you to read these things and come up with creative options and creative situations where you can make use of all these specific thingies. But I don't mind talking through it with you guys, because I'm a big nerd and I like talking to you about stuff like this. But I love Vision of Perfection. It is so much fun to proc Bladestorms, especially when I'm playing this mastery build, especially when I'm playing Storm of Destruction, right? Every time I proc a Bladestorm, even if it's not a super long one, I run faster because of these Azerite traits I have too. I have a little bit more strength, and everybody gets Mortal Strike and bleeds on them. It's crazy. It's super fun. I love it. However, it may pale in utility with other talents, but it's just really fun to proc a Bladestorm. And it reduces the cooldown of your Bladestorm. The minor trait reduces the cooldown of your Bladestorm. So even just sitting here in town, my Bladestorm has a 50-second cooldown, right? And of course that's reduced by Anger Management too, which is really, really cool. It's almost cut in half the cooldown of Bladestorm from what it usually is. It also heals you for 5% of your maximum health. In PvP that's only 2.5, but you know, it's some healing, right? And then in the next rank, when I get rank 3 of it, I'm gonna give haste to my teammates, and it just increases my versatility too, which is kind of funny. So something to think about there. World Vein Resonance comes from Island Expeditions. It just kind of, I guess, gives you some little stats and healing, right? Not something I'm gonna use a whole lot, but something maybe it could be kind of cool. Purification Protocol. This just calls down a Destructo Beam from the sky. You can't be interrupted on this one, and it's only a 1-minute cooldown, so it could pair well with Bladestorm. It could pair well with Warbreaker, things like that. Something to think about. And are such a neat addition to the game. I'm very happy they're here, and you have a lot of cool options. Ripple in Space teleports you. It's kind of cool. If you can make some really slick plays with this. Once again, something I use a lot, but it is kind of funny to just teleport around, just being a beast and doing cool stuff. So I think that right now my setup for like BGs and kicking butt and just having fun is actually Vision of Perfection as my main and Memory of Lucid Dreams as a minor. I don't think I'm ever going to drop Memory of Lucid Dreams. It's just so good. The fact that it gives you a little bit of a heal, refunds rage, and gives you a pretty hefty chunk of versatility, that's pretty much always going to be at least a minor talent. Conflict and Strife definitely earns its place as a major talent, but it's also pretty darn cool for the stacking versatility as a minor talent. So I feel like Conflict and Strife should definitely be in your arsenal somewhere. I feel like Vision of Perfection it kind of its real strength needs to be a major talent. So if you're using Conflict and Strife as a major, I'm not sure I'd be using Vision of Perfection as a minor. But then you could use other cool stuff, like you could use Blood of the Enemy as a minor talent to whenever you crit, you get eventually you get some haste, and it gives you just critical strikes. It gives you flat crit in general, which is pretty cool. You got some options there. You have Crucible of Flame, which stacks up a dot. Like, I'm basically talking through like what are the ones that are good minor utility. But this is also good as a major. So you have a lot of really cool ones. But I love Memory of Lucid Dreams, and I think Conflict and Strife should be in there at some point for serious PvP. But Vision of Perfection is super fun for BGs and stuff like that. So you have a lot of cool talents. Those are the ones that I like the most, I think. I think Conflict, Vision, and Memory of Lucid Dreams, maybe even Blood of the Enemy. And of course, Condensed Life Force has some interesting aspect to it in that whenever it procs those spikes, things take 5% more damage. You really shouldn't overlook that, I don't think. But there's a lot of really cool talents that you can use depending on what you like, right? So, with those taken care of, right? I feel like we're kind of not like super set on which ones, like you can only use these, but those are the cool ones, right? Memory of Lucid Dreams, Conflict and Strife, and then you can use some third one for serious PvP. Vision of Perfection is a lot of fun. If I was going to use Vision, I'd probably put Conflict in the third minor slot. But if I was going to use Conflict, I'd probably put that in the major slot, and then I'd use something else like Crucible of Flame, maybe, as my third, just for some extra damage. Or you could use Vision just to reduce Bladestorm cooldown a little bit and heal you, and give you some minor verse. So if you want to do ultimate versatility stacking, that's the way to do it. But anyway, let's move on before this video becomes 2 hours long. Azerite traits, right? So, my gear right now is jacked up. Do not pay attention to what I'm actually using, but I can show you anyway. This is a good example of a good piece of gear, right? This is nice, okay? My 3 favorite Azerite traits, let's try to break this down just a little bit for you guys. My 3 favorite Azerite traits, majors, for Warrior right now, are still Lord of War. I really like Lord of War still. Gathering Storm is a trait that you're going to see fairly often right now. Also really, really nice. And Crushing Assault. I've really liked Crushing Assault for a long time, and I feel like you're going to find a lot of pieces with Crushing Assault on it. I think it's, aside from the Mythic Plus gear that you can like buy with a Residuum, or getting it out of your boxes, I think it's going to be tough to really do the Lord of War Crushing Assault combo. But basically, my recommendation to you is look for gear that has Gathering Storm, Crushing Assault, Lord of War, and stack those traits as much as you can. I think Crushing Assault, Lord of War are probably the ones to stack the most. Gathering Storm is probably like, so yeah, I'd say that. The primary thing, something that you want 3 of, if you can, it's going to be hard, is Crushing Assault or Lord of War, okay? If you can get 3 of those, awesome. Second off is Gathering Storm. Gathering Storm is really, really cool. The strength bonus that you get and the movement speed is awesome. You are going to want one, if you can, get 1 Strike the Anvil in there somewhere. I think ideally for me, like my favorite traits would be ×3 Crushing Assault, or ×3 Lord of War, 1 Gathering Storm, 1 Strike the Anvil, and then something that I don't have, right? Like a Lord of War, 1 Lord of War, 3 Crushing Assault, Strike the Anvil, Gathering Storm, or like 2 Gathering Storm. You know, you can kind of mix and match just depending on what you get. That's one of the cool things about BFA is you just get like a ton of gear and they try to set up the best build that you can. But I love Crushing Assault and Lord of War as like the primary stackables. Maybe even Crushing Assault overtakes Lord of War at this point. Maybe not. And then Gathering Storm is a cool like secondary one to shoot for, and then getting a Strike the Anvil to smooth out your rotation is really, really nice too. My traits right now are not that though. They're kind of jacked up. I got lucky and got a 445 piece with Gathering Storm, Crushing Assault, Elemental Whirl. I like Elemental Whirl for that like inner ring, that like middle ring. Elemental Whirl is really cool, and Overwhelming Power is really, really cool, obviously. Impassive Visage is really good. That's probably like the best thing to have, like all the way in the middle of your ring here is Impassive Visage. In some situations like this is a weird piece of gear, man. Weird piece of gear, but it's 445. If I don't wear this, I lose like 6k health, and I don't know if that's worth it or not. I'm still thinking that over. It's one of the big struggles of my life right now. Thinking over this. But I get Lord of War. Test of Might sucks for PvP. It sucks, but I have 2 Impassive Visage Elemental Whirls, which is not bad. So this trait's good. These traits are good. This is not great. It just is what it is. It's high item level, so this is the one thing that's wrong with this piece of gear, so it's fine. It is what it is. This one's a heroic one, which gives me Crushing Assault, gives me Elemental Whirl, gives me Moment of Glory, which I really like. Bastion of Might is kind of weird, but I'm pretty sure it's better than Test of Might, so we're gonna use this. How you get this is you spec Prot, you spec this talent, then you go back to arms, and it makes it so your avatar increases your mastery by 600, which is it's half of that in PvE, or sorry, PvP, so 300, but it still gives you a ton of mastery. So if pop avatar, and now my deep wounds are, I mean, this whole thing, it's 42k deep wound, but part of that is my trinket being popped as well. So even if I put this off, it's like still 33k. So it's a fair amount of mastery increase. Pretty darn nice. And avatars make me deal more damage too. So it's just a pretty serious bleed right here. And it does give you ignore pain, which is going to maybe reduce a teeny bit of damage on you. So it's kind of cool. So that's why when I was going over talents, I'm kind of locked into avatar right now because I'm using this trait. But that's just kind of how it works, man. You just get some loot and you kind of have to make adjustments to your character. That's why I'm playing a mastery build. You know, I like Bladestorm a lot. So I'm basically taking what I've gotten from the game and I'm crafting a build around it. So I can make these guides and I can give you guys an idea of what I like to use and what's cool and help you understand like how your class and how these talents work. But it's going to be important that you then take that information and take what you've gotten from the game and kind of craft it into something that's useful to you, that you understand how it works, right? Which is really, really neat. Even a class like Arms Warrior, which I feel like is kind of low mid tier, it's kind of pruned. You can still definitely create some cool builds with synergy within it that I think are really, really fun. But I feel like that breaks down basically what I want to talk about with gear, with your Azerite traits, things to look for, right? This is a really cool talent. I don't have the one right. I don't think I have one that that changes fear, but you really want Impassive Visage, Moment of Glory, and the one that puts like a shield of damage or healing that needs to be broken by your opponents with fear is awesome. The one that gives you a shield is okay. Keep in mind that all these things are cut in half in PvP. But Elemental Whirl and Overwhelming Power are fantastic. There's ones that increase your mastery and haste. Those are okay, I guess, if you have to. Not a big fan of Earthlink. But those are some things to look out for. This is another talent that I was talking about, right? Strike the Anvil. It reduces the cooldown of Mortal Strike whenever you get an Overpower proc, basically. So I could use that instead of Gathering Storm, and maybe I should. But I don't want to, so I haven't yet. And it's okay. That just makes your rotation a lot smoother. So triple stack Crushing Assault or Lord of War if you can. Get, you know, a Gathering Storm or two in there if you can. And then get a Strike in the Anvil too. That'd be the dream, I guess, right? That'd be the dream. But I don't think, like, one Crushing Assault or two Crushing Assault is probably okay. I don't know if you really need one Crushing Assault. Doesn't really deal with much more damage, but I guess it gives you, like, a little bit of rage reduction, right? So one Lord of War is the same kind of thing. It only gives me 10 rage. It only deals a little bit more damage, but it's just it's a good enough talent. If I can't stack things, I may as well use that, right? That's just kind of where we're at. So that's my setup, but you don't need to worry about my setup. Lord of War, Crushing Assault, Gathering Storm, one Strike the Anvil. Those are the things that you want to look out for, I think, for arms. So with our gear wrapped up, with our essences wrapped up, and with our Azerite traits wrapped up, I guess we can break down just a little bit about maybe just basic rotation, and we can talk about some potential arena compositions that might be good for you too. And we'll wrap it up. All right, so with the basics of our abilities all talked about, a lot of times how Arms Warrior PP is going to look like is you're going to charge in, get a Hamstring up, get a Rend up, then we're going to pop Avatar, Warbreaker. You'd use our Execute proc, big Mortal Strike with Sharpened Blade. You're going to have Overpower, maybe get one Slam in there before you start re-rending, re-hamstringing. Mortal Strike probably could have been woven in there beforehand. You Slam when you don't have anything else to do, Overpower whenever it procs, Mortal Strike off cooldown. Keep things like Rend and Hamstring up. Hit those sudden death procs, Mortal Strike off cooldown. Sometimes you can get a little chance to do some AoE with Bladestorm, fill in the gap a little bit. If you're using Crushing Assault, when those procs pop up, boom, you definitely want to use those. Now, whether or not if Mortal Strike and Overpower up at the same time, it's kind of up to you. If you have a ton of rage, you just drop that Mortal Strike to keep your debuff up, your bleeds up. But if you want to have a little bit of a heavier hit, you can use Overpower first to preserve that rage. It's probably a fine idea to use Overpower first, but I can also see the reason why you might want to use Mortal Strike first too. But that's basically how it works, man. You're just gonna keep crunching whenever Warbreaker's up. You have a good opportunity to use it. Just get in there and let her rip. Hit those procs when they pop up. Keep your Rend up, your Hamstring up if you want to. Just keep slamming. Pretty simple stuff. And even spending some time. I don't think Arms is the best in PvE, But even spending some time in PvE as arms and trying to just maximize your damage is going to be good rotational practice. And just chilling and watching the stream and slapping a target dummy just to practice your rotation and build that muscle memory is a fine thing to do as well. But that's going to be the basics of it, right? Keep your debuffs up. Keep your procs flowing. And it's okay to have, like, you know, a little bit of downtime. For me, oftentimes I will, if I have more abilities to press, like if I keep proccing these Mortal Strikes and these Overpowers and these Executes, then my Ren might fall off for a bit. Because I want to make sure I'm using those abilities on proc, because, hey, I mean, it could be the next attack. You proc another Execute, you proc another Overpower, right? And you want to use Mortal Strike off cooldown, because one, because it does a good amount of damage, and two, because, there's just so much utility wrapped up in that, and it needs to go off cooldown. So there's my Vision of Perfection at Bladestorm proc, right? Which is always pretty fun. So that's kind of how it works, guys. It's not a crazy complicated rotation. It's just keeping your debuffs up, hitting your priority system basically best you can. I would say that Execute is a priority over Overpower, though. If you're thinking about that, it's just like kind of like okay, which one do I? If all these are up at once, which ones do I press? And if you're using Strike the Anvil, I definitely recommend that you press Overpower, or sorry, second. Like if they're both up, you have Strike the Anvil, you should probably be pressing Mortal Strike first, and then hitting your Overpower proc, because then you can Mortal Strike, 1.5 seconds later, right? But that's the basics, guys. It's a pretty fun rotation whenever you have a good uptime, right? You just get to sit in there and just crank damage constantly. And while we're just running through our rotation, we can talk just a little bit about arena compositions. So what Arms Warrior does well is really consistent heavy pressure, bringing a Mortal Strike to the table, and peeling well with certain honor talents, right? I don't think that Arms Warriors peel the best out of anything, but dual, disarm, things like War Banner, things like the, 30-second cool, or not 30-second cooldown, minute cooldown Rallying Cry, 30% HP Rallying Cry, are all really good things. So comps that allow you to AoE and comps that allow you to have this kind of like grind 'em up play style are good. So certain melee cleaves, like TSG is probably one of your best bets right now, in terms of just grinding people up. Another good melee cleave could be Turbo Cleave. Enhanced summons aren't in the best spot right now, but in a composition like Turbo Cleave, they can kind of shine and do their thing and get the job done well. If you're not a big, well, I guess I should probably rank KFC in there as one of the melee cleaves too, even though I think it plays a little bit more like a caster melee just because of it's a little bit more setup based. But I guess it's technically 2 melee. So TSG and Turbo are some of the most prevalently seen melee cleaves. Rep Arms Warrior has been a thing that I've seen a little bit recently in tournaments and stuff, so you could try that out. If you want more of a caster melee setup, some of my favorites are Thunder Cleave, which are Elemental Shaman, Arms Warrior. You can play Destro Lock Arms Warrior. You can play Mage Arms Warrior, healer. In terms of like healers for that, Thunder Cleave is probably gonna be Resto Druid. WLD, so Warrior Lock's gonna be Resto Druid or a Paladin. For TSG, I mean, like basically Resto Druid is like probably one of your best healers for a lot of your compositions. But Mystery Monk can work for some of the melee cleaves, and H-Pal can work for really anything. Like a lot of the caster comps, things like that can work out pretty well. We're gonna kill this dummy. But those are probably some of my favorites, and for compositions and how they play out, I definitely encourage you guys to check out my YouTube channel. Been doing a lot of arena, been doing 3s and 2s, I guess. So for 2v2, basically, your best bet's probably Resto Druid, H-Pal, Mystery Monk, things like that. Basically, any Arms Warrior, any healer is kind of how that works. But I definitely encourage you guys to check out some of my YouTube videos about like my arena stuff, because those would be some places where you guys can check out not only compositions that you can play, but also maybe a little bit more gameplay. Planning on getting, obviously, the BG grind will continue for me. Plenty more BG videos about Warrior in BGs and Arena. Even though this video's been a really long one, I made no promises on the outset that it's going to be a short one this time. But I do want to make a Fury guide for you guys as well, so keep an eye out for the Fury guide. But with this video, we've talked about what? Talked about just abilities. We've talked about stats, gear, talents, going over the rotation just a teeny bit here. Talk about arena compositions. So hopefully that'll get you guys just about set up to kick some butt in PvP. In terms of PvE stuff, I don't really play a lot of arms in PvE, but I would imagine that it's gonna be, once you get the feel for it in PvP, chances are you can probably adjust your talents just a teeny bit to maybe go Skull Splitter, Fervor of Battle, in for the kill, and you'd probably be just, and probably one of these talents, probably Bounding Stride, you'd probably be just fine in PvE as well. Just see a pack of mobs, Warbreaker Blade, storm it down. I think you're gonna, I know that I kind of said Test of Might's not that good for PvP, but I think for PvE, Test of Might is a really, really good talent for PvE, so you're probably gonna want to use that for the PvEs, because you can spend, you have a lot more uptime, you can spend a ton more rage. But hopefully this guide has been useful to you guys. I do enjoy making guides for you. I know this one has taken a little bit of time to get out. We just had, you know, we have a newborn baby who's fantastic. We've been doing a lot of streaming, having a lot of fun with that, and basically just kicking butt IRL and in games. Plus, I also want to make sure I give myself a chance to test out the content and figure out what's going on before I then try to go and tell you guys what I think is best. Because I want to set you guys up for success, not just make a video for you guys just to have it up there. But now that we've successfully taken this dummy all the way down to 1 HP, it's probably a good time to wrap up this video. Like I said, hopefully you guys have been useful. Hopefully it's been useful to you guys. Hopefully you enjoyed it. If you did, and if you've watched this entire thing, you're a champion. Make sure you give it a big thumbs up for me. Share it with your friends. Stay tuned, and we'll see you guys next time. Peace!